On February 24, 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. It began with missile strikes, followed by ground troops entering from the north, east, and south. What was the real reason behind Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Was it just about NATO expansion, or is there a deeper geopolitical strategy at play? In July 2025, President Trump said he was disappointed with Putin. He gave Russia a deadline to reach a peace agreement with Ukraine or face new U.S. sanctions. In response, Dmitry Medvedev stated, "Every so-called deadline from Trump is not diplomacy. It's a threat. And every one of them brings us a step closer to war." But why have the United States and Russia come so close to serious confrontation, even war? And why have tensions between these two powers persisted throughout history? Zbigniew Brzezinski once said, "Eurasia is the grand chessboard, the center of global power. If a rival power ever dominates Eurasia, American supremacy will come to an end." In our previous video, we talked about Halford Mackinder, a British geographer and strategist, who in 1904 introduced his famous heartland theory. According to this theory, he argued, who rules Eastern Europe commands the heartland. Who rules the heartland commands the world island. Who rules the world island commands the world. Based on this view, Russia lies right at the center of the heartland, a vast country, rich in natural resources, and the largest in the world by land area. But the key point is this: as long as Russia remains landlocked in the central plains of Eurasia, it lacks the strategic advantage to dominate the world. If Russia manages to gain access to the coastal regions of Eurasia, what Nicholas Spykman later referred to as the Rimland, then according to Zbigniew Brzezinski, it stands a real chance of dominating Eurasia and ultimately the world. So if Russia can combine its vast internal resources with reliable access to the Rimland, it could, in the words of both Mackinder and Brzezinski, become the dominant global power. In May 1995, at a time when the world was still healing from the wounds of the Cold War, U.S. President Bill Clinton traveled to Moscow. The occasion was the 50th anniversary of the victory in World War II. But behind closed doors, a historic conversation took place between the two leaders, one that could have changed the relationship between East and West forever. During that meeting, Boris Yeltsin, the president of Russia, made a surprising proposal to Clinton. Why shouldn't Russia join NATO? Just imagine, Russia, NATO's longtime adversary, becoming a member of the very military alliance that was originally created to counter the Soviet Union. But the United States rejected the offer. Why? For the same geopolitical reasons we've mentioned earlier in this video. Russia is one of the few countries in Eurasia with the geopolitical potential to dominate the region, and that threatens America's superpower status. If Russia had joined NATO, it would mean it was no longer considered a threat, but rather a strategic partner of the West. In that case, the policy of NATO encirclement and the control of Russia's access to the European rimland could no longer be justified. Moreover, if Russia ceased to be a threat, European countries would feel less dependent on NATO and the American security umbrella, and that would eventually lead to greater political independence for Europe from the United States. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia began exporting large volumes of natural gas to Europe, most notably to Germany, at relatively low prices. This cheap and stable energy supply became a pillar of Europe's industrial and economic growth over the next 3 decades. German manufacturing in particular thrived on affordable Russian gas, giving the country a competitive edge in global markets. But the influence of Russian gas extended beyond the economy. As Europe's energy dependency on Russia grew, political ties also deepened. Over time, this created a subtle but significant shift in the geopolitical balance. Europe, especially Germany, began to act with more independence from the United States on issues ranging from foreign policy to trade. For Washington, this was a warning sign. The growing energy partnership between Europe and Russia threatened to undermine U.S. influence over its traditional allies. In many ways, Russian gas became more than just fuel. It became a geopolitical tool, reshaping alliances, rebalancing power, and challenging the post-Cold War order. Following the ousting of Viktor Yanukovych in 2014, an event many described as a color revolution possibly influenced by Western powers, Russia viewed the political shift in Ukraine as a direct threat to its historical, cultural, and strategic sphere of influence. Sensing the advance of NATO and the West toward its borders, Moscow acted swiftly. In a rapid military operation, the Crimean Peninsula was occupied by unidentified armed forces and, shortly afterward, annexed by Russia, following a disputed referendum in March 2014. In the years that followed, Ukraine began to move closer to NATO, initiating formal steps toward membership. This deepened Russia's strategic concerns. Eventually, in February 2022, citing security threats and the need to prevent NATO's expansion, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, a war that continues to reshape global geopolitics. Russia's invasion of Ukraine halted gas exports to Europe, hitting the German and broader European economies hard. In response, Europe moved further away from Russia, becoming increasingly dependent on the United States, both for security, through NATO, and for alternative energy sources. But this leads to a critical and pressing question. Was it not the United States, by supporting a so-called color revolution in Ukraine and pushing for its NATO membership, that deliberately provoked this war, so that Europe's geopolitical order could, once again, be reshaped in America's favor?